My brother Tommy died when he was 9 years old. I watched them lower that tiny white casket into the ground. I held my mother's hand while she screamed his name at the sky. I was 7 years old, and I didn't fully understand death yet, but I understood gone. I understood never coming back. For 42 years, I lived with that. I built my entire life around that loss. Tommy's memory was the foundation of everything: my grief, my faith, my family. And then, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something pulled at me, some feeling I can't explain even now. I picked up, and the voice on the other end said, "Hey, Carolyn, it's Tommy. Don't hang up." I couldn't breathe. I literally could not breathe. And what I discovered over the next 72 hours completely destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family, my childhood, and the people I loved most in this world.
Let me take you back, because you need to understand the full picture before any of this makes sense. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio in the 1970s. Millbrook. Population maybe 3,000 people, one stoplight, a grain elevator, and a church on every corner. The kind of town where everybody knows your name, your mama's name, and what you had for dinner on Sunday. My parents were Richard and Elaine Caldwell. Dad worked at the paper mill. Mom stayed home with us kids. We weren't wealthy, not even close, but we weren't struggling either. We had a 2-story house with a big maple tree in the backyard, a beat-up swing set, and a dog named Biscuit who ate everything that wasn't nailed down. There were 3 of us kids. My older sister Diane, who was 10. Me, Carolyn, at 7. And Tommy, the baby, who was 9. Wait, I know what you're thinking. How was Tommy 9 if I was 7? Shouldn't the baby be the youngest? Tommy was adopted. My parents took him in when he was a toddler, around 2 years old. His birth mother had been a distant cousin of my dad's who'd gotten into serious trouble. Drugs, I think, though nobody ever said that word out loud back then. They just said she couldn't take care of him. And so Tommy came to live with us. I didn't understand adoption when I was little. To me, Tommy was just Tommy. My brother. My best friend. The boy who chased lightning bugs with me in the summer and built snow forts with me in winter. He had red hair, fiery, ridiculous, beautiful red hair, and freckles across his nose and these big brown eyes that made every adult in town hand him an extra cookie. He was the most alive person I have ever known. And then one September morning, he was gone. The official story, the one I grew up with, the one my family told, the one printed in the little local paper, was that Tommy drowned. There was a pond about a half-mile from our house. Bryce Pond, we called it. Kids weren't supposed to go there alone, but kids rarely do what they're supposed to. He wandered off on a Saturday afternoon, while my parents were busy inside the house. By the time anyone noticed he was missing, it was too late. They found his shoes at the edge of the water. They recovered his body 2 days later. My mother never fully recovered from it. She smiled again, eventually. She laughed again, eventually. But there was always something broken behind her eyes after that day. A piece of her went into that ground with Tommy, and it stayed there. We never talked about him. That was the unspoken rule in the Caldwell house. You don't poke at wounds. You don't say his name too loud. You keep moving forward because stopping means falling apart completely, and we just could not do that. So I grew up. I left Millbrook at 18, went to college in Columbus, became an accountant, got married to a good man named Paul, had 2 daughters, and built a quiet, stable life. I came back for Christmas and Thanksgiving, watched my parents grow old and slow, buried my father in 2003, and then my mother in 2019. By October of last year, my sister Diane was the only immediate family I had left. We talked on the phone on Sundays, saw each other at holidays, loved each other the way siblings do, comfortably, reliably, without much drama. I thought I knew everything about my family. I was so wrong. The first strange thing happened about 3 months before the phone call. And looking back now, I realize it wasn't random. Nothing that happened was random. I was going through my mother's things, boxes I'd stored in my basement after we sold her house. I'd been putting it off for 2 years because, honestly, it hurt too much. But Paul had been after me to clear out the space, and one rainy Saturday I finally made myself do it. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Old photos, letters, recipe cards in Mom's handwriting, a box of Dad's fishing tackle. But near the bottom of one cardboard box, buried under a pile of old Christmas cards, I found a folder. Plain manila, no label. Inside were documents, official-looking papers with typed text that had yellowed with age. I almost didn't read them carefully. But one phrase caught my eye. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. I sat down on the basement floor right there among all those boxes and I read every word. The document was dated September 14, 1981. Tommy's death, according to everything I'd ever been told, had occurred on September 9, 1981. This document was dated 5 days after my brother supposedly drowned. The name on the document wasn't my parents' names. It was the name of a family I didn't recognize. A couple from Indiana, Gerald and Ruth Harmon. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was paperwork related to the original adoption. Maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe I was reading it wrong. I took pictures of everything with my phone, put the folder back in the box, and carried the whole thing upstairs. I told Paul what I'd found that night. He's a calm man, calmer than me by 1,000 miles, and he suggested the most logical thing: before I spiral, just do some research. See what you can find. So I started digging. And that's when things got strange. I tried to find Tommy's death certificate online. Ohio vital records are partially digitized, not everything, but a lot from that era. I found my father's death certificate within 30 seconds. My mother's. My maternal grandmother's. Tommy's? Nothing. I called the county records office in Millbrook. Explained what I was looking for. The woman on the phone was polite but confused. She searched twice. She said she could see an entry, a placeholder, but the certificate itself had been sealed. Sealed? I said. Why would a child's death certificate be sealed? She said she didn't know, and that I'd need to file a formal request with the court. I started shaking again. But what happened next completely changed everything. I called Diane. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I was just making small talk. I mentioned I'd been going through Mom's boxes and had found some old documents related to Tommy's adoption. Did she know anything about a family named Harmon? There was a silence on the line that lasted maybe 4 full seconds. Where did you hear that name? She asked. Not. I don't know any Harmons. Not. Who? Where did you hear that name? My blood went cold. Diane, I said slowly. What do you know? Carolyn, just leave it alone. Please. There's nothing good that comes from digging into this. Diane, I found documents. Legal documents dated after Tommy died. Signed by a family from Indiana. What is going on? Stop. Her voice was sharp in a way I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. Stop digging. I mean it. Some things are better left alone. And she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong that I didn't stop digging. Of course I didn't. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do best. I'm an accountant, after all. I follow paper trails for a living. I track down things people try to hide in numbers, in filings, in documents buried deep where they think nobody will look. I filed the formal request for Tommy's death certificate. I hired a genealogy researcher named Kathleen who came highly recommended through an online forum. I sent her the photos of the documents I'd found and asked her to trace the Harmon family from Indiana. Kathleen called me 4 days later. Her voice had that particular quality, controlled, gentle, that people use when they're about to say something that's going to knock you sideways. Carolyn, she said, I need to share what I found, and I want you to be sitting down. I was already sitting. My knees had stopped working the moment I'd seen her name on my caller ID. She told me this. Gerald and Ruth Harmon were a couple from Bloomington, Indiana, who had been on adoption waiting lists for years. They were church-going people, respected in their community, financially stable. They had desperately wanted a child. In September of 1981, they had received a child. A boy. A red-haired, freckle-faced boy with brown eyes. The placement had been arranged privately. Not through the state. Not through a licensed agency. Through an intermediary, an attorney who operated in a legal gray zone that barely existed anymore, arranging what people called gray market adoptions. Money changed hands. Papers were signed. And a family in Ohio told everyone their son had drowned, while they handed him to strangers in Indiana who renamed him and started a new life. My parents sold my brother. I know that sounds brutal. I've tried to find a softer way to say it in my head 100 times and I can't. They gave him to another family. Whether money was the primary motivation or something else, shame, crisis, I still don't know the full story. The result was the same. Tommy didn't drown in Bryce Pond. Tommy was alive. And he had been alive for 42 years while I laid flowers on an empty grave. Let that sink in for a moment. An empty grave. I don't even know what's in that coffin. I don't know if anything is. My whole life, every September 9th, I had driven 2 hours back to Millbrook and stood at that headstone with the little lamb carved on it, Thomas Richard Caldwell, beloved son, and cried and talked to him and told him I missed him. And he was in Indiana. Growing up. Living his life. I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried until I couldn't anymore. But here's where the story takes a turn I was not prepared for. Because 3 weeks after Kathleen gave me this information, 3 weeks during which I'd tried to contact Diane 6 times and gotten no response, during which I'd filed for the sealed death certificate, during which I'd barely slept. At 2:07 in the morning on a Tuesday, my phone rang. Unknown number. Indiana area code. I almost didn't answer. Paul was asleep beside me. My whole body felt like ice. I answered. Hey, Carolyn. A man's voice. Deep but warm. Slightly nervous. It's Tommy. Please don't hang up. I know this is... I know. But I needed to call you. I've known about you for 6 months and I couldn't wait anymore. I just couldn't. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not breathe. My husband woke up because I made a sound, not a word, not a scream, just this broken, gasping sound that I had never made before in my life and have not made since. He turned on the light and looked at my face and grabbed my hand and I just held the phone out toward him with tears streaming down my face and I said, Paul. It's my brother. I don't have the right words for the weeks that followed. I've thought about how to describe it, and the closest I can come is this. Imagine your entire understanding of your own life, your own history, your own grief. Imagine all of it being peeled back, layer by layer, and underneath you find something that's simultaneously wonderful and devastating at the exact same time. Tommy, who now went by Thomas Harmon, Tom to everyone who knew him, was 60 years old. He lived in a suburb of Indianapolis with his wife, Linda. He had 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. He'd spent his career as a high school history teacher, which made me laugh and cry at the same time, because our dad had always said Tommy asked more questions than any child alive. Why is the sky blue? Why do leaves fall? Why can't dogs talk? And of course he'd grown up to be a teacher. Gerald and Ruth Harmon, his adoptive parents, had both passed away. Before Ruth died, she had told Tom the truth, or at least her version of it. That he had been adopted privately. That his birth family was in Ohio. That there were things in his past that were complicated. Tom had hired a researcher of his own. And he'd found me. He told me he'd had my phone number for 6 months before he called. 6 months of working up the nerve. 6 months of wondering how I would react, whether I would even believe him, whether the life he built could survive the earthquake of this truth. We talked for 4 hours that first night. By the end, I was sitting on my back porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars, listening to my brother's voice, the brother I'd mourned for 4 decades, tell me about his life. His first bike. The dog he'd had growing up. The way he'd always felt something was missing, some unnamed absence he couldn't explain, even in the middle of a happy life. "Did you know you used to call me Tommy Bug?" he asked at one point. Yes," I whispered. "How do you know that?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "I just always remembered it. Like a dream. This little girl calling me Tommy Bug." I absolutely fell apart. But even inside that overwhelming joy of discovering my brother was alive, there was something else building. Something darker. Because I kept coming back to one unavoidable truth. My parents knew. My parents had done this. And they had gone to their graves and never once told me. Not a word. Not a hint. Not a letter left behind with any explanation. And Diane knew. My sister, the only person left who shared my childhood, the person I called every Sunday, who sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner, she had known. I could hear it in her voice the moment I said the name Harmon. She had known. And she had chosen the secret over me. Over Tommy. Over the truth. That grief sat inside the joy like a stone. I gave myself 1 week to fall apart completely. Then I drove to Diane's house. She lived about 40 minutes from me, in a nice suburb, brick house, good neighborhood. I'd been to that house for birthday parties and holidays and lazy Sunday afternoons more times than I could count. I knocked on her door at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. She opened it and took one look at my face, and she knew. She just knew. She stepped back and let me in without a word. We sat at her kitchen table, and I laid out everything. The documents. Kathleen's report. Tom's phone call. All of it. I watched my sister's face while I talked, and I watched the defenses fall one by one until what was left was something raw and exhausted and deeply ashamed. When I finished, the kitchen was completely silent. Then she said, "How much do you want to know?" "Everything," I said. "Every single thing." And she told me. She had been 10 years old in 1981. Old enough to understand more than my parents realized. She had heard the arguments, our parents, late at night when they thought the kids were asleep. There had been financial trouble. Serious trouble. Dad had gotten into some kind of debt situation at the mill, something about a loan gone wrong. She didn't know all the details. What she knew was that there had been a man who came to the house several times. A man in a suit. And after the last visit, Tommy was gone and the debt was apparently resolved. She had been told, ordered really, never to speak of it. She was 10 years old, and she was terrified of our parents, and she did what she was told. As I got older, Diane said, her voice barely above a whisper, I told myself it was better not to know more. That Tommy had been placed with a good family, that maybe it was even better for him than staying with us. That the truth would only destroy what was left. It destroyed it anyway, I said. Just quietly. From the inside. She started crying. And I want to be honest with you. I didn't comfort her. Not right then. Because I needed her to sit in that discomfort for a minute. I needed her to understand what had been taken from all of us by this silence. But here's what I also knew, sitting there at her kitchen table. Diane had been a 10-year-old child. She had been failed by our parents just as surely as Tommy and I had been. She had carried a secret that was never hers to carry for over 4 decades. And whatever choices she'd made to protect herself from the full weight of it, I understood them, even when I hated them. I told her Tom wanted to meet her. She broke completely open at that. Just sobbed. Covered her face with her hands and shook. He's really alive? She kept saying. He's really alive? He's really alive, Diane. I want to be careful about the word karma here, because this story doesn't have a villain twisting in the wind while we celebrate. Life is messier than that. My parents are gone. They will never answer for what they did. Whatever reckoning they may have faced, in their own hearts, in their own quiet moments, I will never know. But there are consequences that matter. The story got out. Not because I wanted it to, and not because Tom did. But Millbrook is still a small town. I filed legal documents. Records were unsealed. There was a brief, quiet article in the county paper about a historical adoption record being corrected. And word got around. The people who remembered the Caldwell family, who had attended the funeral, who had brought casseroles to our door in September of 1981, they found out. Old neighbors. Church friends. People who had known my parents as pillars of the community. The reputation my parents spent their entire lives building, the image of a grieving, faithful, upstanding family, quietly crumbled. I won't pretend that didn't feel like something. I won't pretend it felt like justice, exactly. But it felt like truth. And sometimes that's the only justice available to us. As for Diane, she has been in therapy since all of this came out. That was her choice, entirely on her own, and I respect her for it. We are still sisters. That Sunday phone call still happens. But we're doing the harder work now, the work of actually knowing each other, instead of two people performing a comfortable version of a relationship, while a 50-year-old lie sits in the room with us. And Tom. Oh, Tom. We met in person for the first time on a rainy November afternoon in Columbus. Paul came with me. Tom brought his wife, Linda. We'd agreed to meet at a restaurant, neutral ground, public space, easy to leave if anyone needed air. I got there first. Sat at the table. Watched the door. And then a tall man walked in with red hair, gone gray now, but still there, still that same ridiculous Caldwell red, and freckles that age had faded but not erased, and brown eyes that I recognized before he even crossed the room. I stood up. He saw me. We just stood there for a second, maybe 10 feet apart, and I think both of us were just confirming. Making sure this was real. Making sure we weren't dreaming. And then I crossed the room and I hugged my brother for the first time since 1981, and I said into his shoulder, "I looked for you. I didn't know I was looking, but I was always looking." He held on for a long time. This big, gray-haired 60-year-old man holding his 57-year-old sister in the middle of a restaurant, while both of us just completely fell apart. Linda was crying. Paul was crying. Half the restaurant was pretending not to watch and failing completely. We talked for 5 hours. He told me about his life. I told him about mine. We found the strange little echoes, the things that are just woven into you, regardless of who raises you. He hates mushrooms, exactly like me. He taps his fingers when he's thinking, exactly like our dad used to. He has a laugh that comes out of nowhere, loud and sudden, and Diane told me later when I described it that it was exactly how Tommy used to laugh when he was little. 42 years. 42 years of a life unlived together. 42 years of missing someone without even knowing you were missing them. We can't get that time back. But we have now. And now is not nothing. Now is, in fact, everything. I think about the little girl I was in September of 1981 a lot these days. 7 years old, holding her mother's hand at a graveside service, looking at a white casket being lowered into the ground. Told that her brother was gone. Told that grief was the only appropriate response. Told, by everything around her, to accept the story and keep moving. That little girl deserved the truth. Tommy deserved the truth. We both spend our whole lives carrying losses we didn't have to carry, a grief that was manufactured, a hole that was created by choice, not by accident. And I have to live with the complicated reality that the people who did this to us, my parents, the people who sang hymns in church every Sunday and brought neighbors soup when they were sick and by all outward appearances were good people, those same people made a choice that fractured 2 lives and echoed through decades. I don't know how to fully forgive that. But I'm working on it. Not for them, they're gone. For me. And for Tom. Because here's what I've learned, at 57 years old, after the most disorienting year of my entire life. The truth has a way of surviving. It gets buried, it gets sealed, it gets locked in manila folders and hidden in basement boxes. But it breathes. It waits. It keeps sending signals into the dark, a document that surfaces, a researcher who follows a thread, a man in Indiana who finally gets up the nerve to dial a phone number at 2 in the morning. The truth survives. And sometimes, not always, not easily, not without tremendous pain, it finds its way home. Tommy found his way home. After 42 years, my brother came home. If this story moved you, share it. And if you're holding a truth that needs to be spoken, a secret that's weighing you down, maybe today is the day you make the call.